It is Friday, August 2nd. Let's talk PlayStation. Welcome back, everyone, to another Tomba episode of LTPS. As always, let's begin with our PS Plus reminder. This is your last call to claim the July PS Plus Essential Games before they go away. Make sure you claim those, get that done. This coming Tuesday on the 6th, it's going to change over to LEGO Star Wars, The Skywalker Saga, PS4, PS5, Five Nights at Freddy's, Security Breach, PS4, PS5, and Ender Lilies Quietus of Nights on PlayStation 4 as well. Really, that seems like the standout title, if anything. I think one thing we can say, which is abundantly clear, is that Sony and LEGO have a very strong relationship because, my God, we are getting so many LEGO games on every single tier of PlayStation Plus. So if you're a LEGO fan, then you're probably eating right now. Security Breach seems okay. I mean, I know that one's very popular for a lot of younger folks, but I don't know, that's one that doesn't really appeal to me too much. Yeah, Ender Lily seems pretty cool. It's like a side-scrolling, I guess Metroidvania style, depends on what you would consider Metroidvania nowadays, but like action-adventure, platforming sequences, and love the art style on that one. Didn't really know a whole lot about it until this recent reveal, so if anything, I always enjoy when some sort of unknown titles come out of nowhere, or at least unknown to me, since the game came out like 2 years ago, and I guess it was reviewed quite well, but it seems like there's been more misfires on PS Plus Essential in recent months versus I don't know, at least a year and a half, 2 years ago, I'd say it was, generally pretty good. Now, moving on to our first news story about PS Plus Premium, where we have yet another example of finding out about a classic game before it's officially confirmed, and this time around it's something where the source is really solid, because typically we do learn about a lot of classic games right before they go live on PSN and before Sony actually confirms it, but typically that's been a lot of ratings in Taiwan, which that on its own is always very reliable. In this case, though, it's Sony themselves, because they sent out this marketing email. If you have that ticked off for your account, you probably always get these marketing emails all the time, and so this one is for PlayStation Plus Premium, just letting you know about certain games that are on the service. And so in that email they do list off Secret Agent Clank, which as of right now that game is not on the service, and this is indeed a very real email. Many people have confirmed it, and so this game is probably coming. So I guess that's another little oopsie on their end, but not all too surprising given that we know that they're working through their back catalog of IP. So, I mean, that was certainly one that would probably show up at some point. And given the nature of how often we get PSP games versus the PS2 versions, despite how the PS2 floodgates are now open with that new emulator from implicit conversions, I would probably still suspect this is going to be the PSP one that does get released on the service. Which actually, in this case, the PS2 version is preferred, if only because I know with this game there was a lot of like balancing changes with the PlayStation 2 version. I mean, that was a thing for a lot of PSP games back in the day, is that they would typically ship and release on PSP first, and so in my head these are always PSP games, but like a lot of them eventually got PlayStation 2 ports like a year down the road, and that's usually a time to spruce up the game, make it look a little bit pretty. And in this case, I think the one thing with the game was like they just make the bolts a lot more plentiful in the game, so you can more easily buy equipment and things throughout your playthrough. So I know a lot of fans prefer that version. I would assume the PSP one is coming though, which really I would like all versions of these games eventually down the road anyway. So give me PSP and PS2 for that matter. But we can also say that Implicit Conversions is still working on adding trophies to previously released classic games as well. So Thrillville recently got a patch, so that one also now has a platinum on PS4, PS5, the two native versions that are on PSN. So at least good to see that we're getting more of those games patched for trophies, the ones that are still missing. Moving on to our next news story, Sony is running a massive sale right now on PlayStation 5 hardware, so if you're in the market for a PS5, then now's a pretty good time, because digital edition consoles here in the US are back down to its pre-price increase of $400 USD. The disc console is $450, and I would recommend buying that anyway, because you're still going to come out ahead versus the if you buy, say, the disc drive for the slim console down the road. So that's still a better savings to just get the disc console immediately, but you can buy that. The console cover covers on PS Direct. I think every color and variation is on sale right now as well, so good time to give your console a makeover. Also, the Pulse headsets are on sale. That all runs until the 6th, so this coming Tuesday. But the real news here is PlayStation VR 2 is also on sale. But it's not simply $50 off. It's $200, which is a very steep price decrease, because PSVR 2, as we know, has been a very costly headset at $550 to $600 USD, but now you can get a base headset for $350 or the Horizon bundle for $400 even. And so this is something where it's caused massive interest in the headset, because we had this one report come out from theshortcut.com where, according to exclusive retailer Amazon data seen by The Shortcut, PSVR 2 sales saw a massive 2,350% increase over a 24-hour period after the sale started. So that is something where we always have to consider with percentages. They can always seem very impressive, but that's based on what kind of number they're working off of. And I think I and many of you have no doubt in our minds that that number was probably not very impressive, right? Because the data goes from like January 1st up until right now where the sale started. So either way, the 2,000 plus increase is still a lot, given that shows that you drop the price by a significant amount. That will move the needle to I would say a degree that's much higher than what we've seen so far, especially with the PC adapter right around the corner and the PC support being available, which that on its own is something where, like, yeah, we know PSVR 2 is not going to be very feature complete on PC, but at $350 for what is a very compelling VR headset, even that might be a compromise that PC owners are willing to overlook for that price point. And this kind of goes into the ongoing conversations we've always had about PSVR 2. I would hope that this is a very good case study from Sony's point of view on what kind of price this thing probably needs to be at for it to be a lot more compelling to both PlayStation 5 owners and the PC audience. Because also the PC support, as we can tell from how they designed and made PSVR 2, they would have never done the PC adapter had this thing been a moderate success, just tied directly to PlayStation 5 normally, like we saw with the original PSVR. But it is something where we always have to consider that this thing was in development for a very long time in tandem with PlayStation 5. Sony, like any other big company, was not anticipating the economic environment we're in right now, where from 2020 to 2020, mid 2022, there was a lot of insane consumer spending during COVID, and then it all kind of bottomed out, and we're coming out of the other side of this in 2023 and 24, where there's just this economic environment of high interest rates, a high cost of living, massive layoffs across various companies trying to save money. And when you launch a headset in early 2023 that cost $550 to $600, and it's already on its own a very niche market, this is the rant I will always make time and time again. Even with a price decrease, even with backwards compatibility or PC support or a lot of incredible, compelling software, it's still a virtual reality headset. No matter what, this thing is not going to move, 25, 30 plus million units. It's not going to be this weird metric where 1 in every 2 PlayStation 5 owners has a PSVR 2. It's simply not going to happen. But you can still address those problems and make this thing just a lot more compelling. So in this case, I would hope it is a case study for Sony looking at this price tag, seeing how well it's doing now, and realizing maybe that's the price we're going to have to keep this thing at in order to make this thing just viable at some point. And I would assume they're probably not making much money. I wouldn't even say making money. I would assume they're losing money on the headsets, selling it at $350 to $400. But they're probably moving the stock that they've already made, right? Like I can't even picture a scenario where they've been manufacturing new PSVR 2 units. It's simply been this Horizon bundle for how long, and at least for the Horizon bundle, if you want it for PC, then you really don't need the code for Horizon. So that's why we saw the base headset sell out on Amazon. So that might be a good reason why that headset was the more advantageous one. But it's just, there's so many ways to look at this, so I don't want to rant about it again, but I hope that's where the company's coming from, is realizing, okay, we might be losing a lot of money and just eating face on this headset, but if we want to be a part of the rising tide lifts all boats for the VR marketplace, which I wholeheartedly think every single company should be in it for everybody else, because that's what we need for VR to be a thing in the first place, then that's what Sony should do. Let's see a permanent price decrease, and let's get there sooner rather than later. All right, moving on to some Astro Bot news, because this game is coming out very soon, September 6th, so it's right around the corner, which is very exciting. And this game, much like Concord, is also getting a special limited edition DualSense controller as well. And my god, this thing looks gorgeous. So it's going to be available on PS Direct for pre-order on August 9th for $79.99 USD, so a little bit cheaper than the Concord one, oddly enough. But it does look very clean, so it's mostly an all-white controller. You've got those blue shiny accents on the handles there, the bottom white trim piece, then Astro's eyes on the touchpad, the white face buttons with the blue outlines for the PlayStation icons. Just a very clean looking controller that does resemble Astro's dual speeder in the actual game itself. So also very thematic there. But what's funny about this controller, right, is that it looks so good, and obviously I love it, but it's not a surefire thing for me to buy this. I don't know, it's weird with PS5. I don't know if anybody else has the same sort of situation, but with this console cycle, Sony finally offers a pro-style premium controller, that being the DualSense Edge. So that's my daily driver, and it's a really nice controller to the point where I like additional colors for controllers generally, or limited edition ones for some of my favorite games that I see on various platform cycles. But when you've got like a price delta of like a $200 premium controller, like I'm always going to use that. So in this case, where it's like I already have a second controller for the odd case where like local co-op could be a thing for me, and I've got various DualSense controllers at this point, obviously, but it's like you sort of have to ask yourself, do I really need another one when I'm not going to play it or use it? Especially this one, which it's got white analog sticks. Like, let's not humor the idea that you should be like daily playing with that controller, because that's not going to hold up very well long term. So as nice as it is, I don't know, I'll probably still get it because it's like a nice like shelf piece, but the Edge has made it a very different buying decision when looking at extra controllers that Sony puts out, which, I don't know, it also seems like they're not doing them nearly as often as PS4 or PS3 on a launch-line basis for just straight-up additional colors or special limited edition ones. I don't know if that's just how it seems, and I'm wrong, but it does feel like that's the case. Really, what I'm waiting for is some kind of frosted blue controller that we've seen Sony do for, I think, it's been like every PlayStation console cycle, where mainline home console, where they offer some sort of frosted blue DualShock. So the DualSense needs that treatment. That I will absolutely buy. Now, in other Astro Bot news, what we can also say here is that China Joy 2024 was a very good weekend, because we saw a lot of gameplay for various titles coming to PlayStation 5, including Astro Bot 2, because this is I think it's the same gameplay demonstration that the press had with their hands-on time during Summer Game Fest. I'm not sure if this is like really new per se, but we still had some direct feed captures from Gamatsu showing off a lot of uninterrupted sequences for those levels that the press had hands-on time with at SGF. So we saw a lot of Astro, which showing off his abilities, right? So he's got that one where he can like puff up like Kirby to reach higher areas, and he's like really floaty, or he also gets these like boxing gloves that let you punch and grapple, which that's the level with the octopus boss fight, which that also leads into more extended platforming sequences. And we also got a better look at the like world galaxy view with all the different planets, and it looks like when you wrap up a level, everything that you collected goes back to your base planet with your PS5 console on it. So that one shot where Astro is riding on the PlayStation 5, and then all the other bots on the various PlayStation like accessories and hardware and things like that, that almost seems like a sort of end level climax for the entire game. So it almost seems like you're trying to build back up that PlayStation 5 console. And we also saw one of the more challenging like side platforming levels where you have to rescue a VIP bot, which for this demonstration, it was Jack, baby. I love it, seeing the Jack VIP bot there, which, it's funny too, that Jack VIP bot now has hair versus Astro's Playroom, where he did not have his like iconic green, do going on. But Either way, yeah, a lot of good gameplay, solid stuff, absolutely worth sitting down and watching, and getting a taste of what Astro is going to bring this coming September. Still just so excited for what is a more modest budget, very colorful looking platformer that also leans into more difficult platforming sequences as well. The Jack level, I think, was pretty illustrative of what you can expect, where it does seem like it can be a little bit demanding for that kind of the challenge it's posing. Now, as for the other China Joy presentations, we can also mention the various China Hero Project games, which had a lot of gameplay shown off. So these were again captured by Gamatsu, and so we can't go over everything because each one is like 30-40 minutes long, and there's obviously a very clear language barrier, but we do have some direct feeds and showing off the gameplay for these various titles. So I'll leave every one of these linked down below if you want to see them, but the one for Lulan, that was simply an extended discussion about the game, so still concept art, no gameplay. I thought we were going to get gameplay for that, but it seems like that is not the case, but that is a recently announced China Hero Project game. The big one we've been following for a while is Lost Soul Aside, so that did get a pretty thorough gameplay deep dive. Looks like it's coming together, but there is still no release date for that game, despite us hearing that it was supposed to come out this year, so I don't know if this is something where it's still very much, it needs some time in the oven, probably maybe early, mid-2025. Maybe considering it's a bit more high profile, this would be something that Sony wants to announce during a state of play or a showcase. Depends on what Sony plans on doing, obviously, but we do know that game has made appearances prior during, more specialized PlayStation presentations, so maybe that's where they want to save the release date. But that game does seem to be coming together finally after what seems like, what is it? It's been like 6, 7, 8 years. It's been a long time for that game. But Unending Dawn, that one does look like it has a long ways to go. So we got an extended look at that gameplay as well, which it does feel a lot more Souls-like. At least that's what I'm picking up. Again, despite the language barrier, you can just see that the sort of one-on-one combat sequences they were showing off for this game just look a little stiff, maybe some very bare bones animations, but it's still nice to get a look at the game and know that there's a roadmap at some point where this game is going to show up and release on PlayStation 5. And I do like the general theming of the game being that it's more basically anime, which I can always get down with. We also got Phantom Blade Zero gameplay as well. That is shaping up to look quite nice. And then there's also Project Jinyi Wei, and that looks a lot more arcadey as far as another samurai game goes. So I know some are kind of looking at this game and just maybe it's a bit of an eye roll that we've had so many in recent years that were either came out or more that are coming out down the road. But this one does seem to carve out its own path, so it does look a lot more floaty with the traversal, and same for the combat as well. It seems like it's a bit more loose and playful in that regard, but gameplay is always so hard to judge if you're not actually playing it yourself. But again, I'll leave all that linked down below, so if you want to see more on these games, there's so much more to actually look at versus the TLDR that I just gave you. But China Hero Project, it looks like we've got a lot more titles in the pipeline. All right, moving on to our big news story from this past week. Developer Bungie, that Sony acquired back in July 2022 for $3.6 billion, and that was for their live service expertise. And also Bungie would, at the time, stay as an independent subsidiary, and they were not part of PlayStation Studios proper. But now that might be changing based on the financial turbulence that Bungie has been experiencing, because in October 2023 they did a mass round of layoffs, and now this past Wednesday they confirmed more layoffs were happening immediately. So this was confirmed again on Wednesday in a studio blog post by Bungie CEO Pete Parsons. So they confirmed the layoffs there. They say, quote, due to rising costs of development and industry shifts as well as enduring economic conditions, they've had to make substantial changes to their cost structure. So they are eliminating 220 roles. Now, they also confirm that they are deepening their integration with SIE, where 155 additional roles are moving over to SIE in the next few quarters. Alongside that, one of their incubation projects, which is meant to be some kind of action game set in a science fantasy universe, that's being spun off into a new studio within PlayStation Studios. And we're also hearing from Bloomberg's Jason Schreier that it's about 40 people that are a part of that team. So that would mean in total, Bungie is going from a headcount of 1,300 to around 850. Also, one of their spin-off projects, codenamed Payback, there was some speculation and confusion around that one, so that game was never meant to be Destiny 3, but that one was also canceled a while ago, alongside all of these plans that were, I guess, in motion the entire time. So even though this is all happening in spite of, Destiny 2's Final Shape expansion doing well, this was apparently all in motion, and it was going to happen, which, if you remember from the previous round of layoffs back in October 2023, IGN ran that report around, that was December, about the atmosphere around Bungie at that time, where they were at a low point because there were concerns about Sony taking over, because at the time when the studio was acquired, their independence was contingent on meeting certain financial goals. Because up to this point, again, Bungie has still operated as an independent subsidiary, so they are not considered a PlayStation studio, but the original deal did put SIE's Herman Hulst and Eric Lempel on their board of directors. So there has been this looming fear that maybe the Sony takeover will happen, but fear might not be the appropriate word here because it depends on who you ask. The immediate aftermath we saw with this news announcement on Wednesday is that a lot of former Bungie staff really had some harsh words for, well, really they were firmly placing blame on Bungie CEO Pete Parsons and not Sony. So we have Liana Rupert here, a former 11-year co-lead at Bungie. She had some harsh words to share on Twitter. So they say, and I quote here, "You are a liar, a thief, and so many things we can't discuss publicly. Step down and without the giant Sony payout. This isn't on Sony. This is squarely on the failure of leadership, plain and simple." Griffin Bennett, another former Bungie employee, says, "C-suite taking accountability for any of this or still just withholding bonuses, and it'll be settled in-house. Poor leadership has crushed one of the greatest developers of all time. Retire Pete." Sam, another former employee, says, "Coward, you did this. You chose this. I'm already listed as do not work with, and I don't care anymore. You lied to my face, straight to it. You also invited me to see your new cars 2 days before you laid me off. 2 effing days. Leave now." The other really crazy thing about all these grievances being aired out is that we also had some speaking on the condition of anonymity when they were talking with Stephen Totilo of GameFile, and there's been this very clear suggestion that at the time when Bungie was about to be acquired by Sony, Bungie leadership was, I don't know, it sounds like maybe cooking the books in a way, but maybe making it seem as though their prospects had a lot of upside, when the reality is that they maybe were just not in the best financial spot. And the thing we can actually look back at is their headcount before they were acquired, because it was something where we had the official slides from the business segment briefing back in, this would have been 2023, so the SIE business portion, where they I think put the headcount on there of around 900 staff, or there was some sort of official number we had at the time. So we know that they've scaled up tremendously under ownership of Sony, but they were still independent, so they had their own autonomy, their own corporate structure. There is a lot of discussion going on right now in terms of how much blame is on Pete, how much blame is on Sony for obviously consolidating and bringing in Bungie, and it's still something where everybody's on Sony's payroll at this point, and so they're still, as the parent company, they have final say, and we simply don't know the exact details of the agreement when they were acquired. We just have reports about the contingency agreement that, hey, if you're not meeting certain financial goals, then we're going to step in, then we're going to take over this company and start steering the ship ourselves, which in a way is maybe a bit problematic, because the entire reason why Sony acquired Bungie was for live service expertise. They would remain independent, but they would oversee and provide feedback on various projects throughout Sony's portfolio because SIE was going to be investing tremendously into live service games. And there is still some value there that took place. We'll be talking about that for a later news story. But, there's that portion to consider, is that, how much of it is on Pete, how much is on Sony. The interesting thing is, and this prospect I think is a very fair one to consider, which is, if Bungie was in this much of a, I don't know if sinking ship is maybe the right way to put it, but live service is clearly a very tough thing to sustain, and with that many people working on a game like, Destiny and various other projects and incubation teams that they had going on at Bungie and trying to scale up, obviously, and they, had these ambitious targets, but it's just a lot to manage, and so staying private was probably not an option. That's why they sold to Sony, right? I mean, you have to consider Bungie's history as well, where they've been acquired before. They've had these agreements with like Activision, and they got out of that because it wasn't going well for them. It's just a very tough business to navigate, but it sounds like they basically had to sell to Sony. There's also some murmurings going on that Sony's been more of an advocate of Bungie now that they are part of the entire organization, and Sony's trying to sort of soften that blow, so to speak, by incorporating those 155 additional roles throughout SIE. I mean, that alone sounds like it's Sony trying to salvage what is a mistake in a way. I don't know if I could really say it's a mistake right now, if only because it's one of those things where in the short immediate term of the here and now, where they acquired them back in mid-2022, we're only at 2024, and games take so long to make, and so many projects haven't even come out yet, and same for Bungie's own projects as well. It's something where long-term, 5-10 years, we don't know exactly what kind of fruits can be bared here, but at least within these short 2 years, this was a very problematic acquisition in that it was $3.6 billion, a ton of money for what is a studio that clearly is in turmoil and has a lot of financial troubles, and laid off a lot of staff to maintain independence, which it sounds like a lot of staff within Bungie did not even necessarily want that, because that would have meant Pete Parsons would have stayed as the CEO. In theory, if Herman is stepping in, and it sounds like that might now be happening. I'm not sure if we know for certain if it's like it's a done deal now, Sony completely controls the company or not, but if the wheels are moving on that process right now, then that would imply that they're not going to need Pete, and they're going to throw him out the door. But the company already set aside like $1.6 billion purely for employee retention, because that's also the entire point of acquiring a studio like Bungie, is that you want to maintain the talent at the studio and give them incentives to stay on board, because that's the entire purpose. You want the talent, and that's historically what Sony has always done with acquiring studios, right? I mean, it's always historically been long-term second-party partners, right? Developers that they know and trust, and they've got a proven track record. This one obviously broke that to a degree, but even at the time it made sense to me, which is, okay, if Sony is going to invest in live service, it is something where you're going to want to probably get expertise in that discipline. Sony is obviously great at making a number of video games, but this is a very different marketplace for them. We've already seen troubles there and a lot of failures and some canceled games, and Bungie coming in is something where they're going to be able to provide that insight and knowledge. There's a lot of valuable institutional knowledge that is still at that studio, right? Despite all the problems it may have. So it still always made sense to me to acquire Bungie. Even if that's, obviously they're working on games and investing in games that I don't personally care for, but in terms of evaluating the business model and what they're attempting to do, that made sense to me. But it seems abundantly clear that this was it's just a mess, man. It's crazy how this is playing out, especially for where Bungie is and maybe the lies they were portraying to Sony to get acquired, and now Sony's just like cleaning this whole mess up, and it's like, do we really want Sony to operate Bungie? I still feel it's something where it's like, well, they wanted you for the talent, now they have to figure out how to foster that properly when they did not know how to do that, and that's why they picked up Bungie. You know what I mean? It's just this vicious cycle that doesn't really work out for anybody, but it sounds like Sony has been trying to just clean this up and really advocate for the studio and the projects that they do have ongoing. So we'll obviously keep following this, but it's a crazy thing that's played out, and I am curious to know if that did, if that's for sure where we're at right now. Has the company been taken over by SIE, or is this just the, very clear stepping stones to that happening at some point, no matter what? Now, obviously, we just kind of glossed over this portion of the Bungie news, so we'll talk about this now, which is a brand new studio forming within PlayStation Studios. So this is, again, a 40-person team, an incubation project at Bungie, moving over to PS Studios proper. We still don't know if Bungie is, in the here and now, completely taken over and also moving into SIE, but in the case of this studio, we know it's going to be a proper PS Studios game, and based on how Bungie has described it, where they call it some kind of, they say it draws inspiration from fighting games, platformers, MOBAs, life sims, frog-type games, wrapped up in a light-hearted comedic world. That sounds like the project codenamed Gummy Bears, and we've got concept art for that game, which is in line with Bungie's description. So I guess that's what we can look forward to now for this particular game. No clue how far along it is. I think for those that were in the Bungie circle and really following the happenings with that studio, Gummy Bears was on hold for a long time, and now it's clearly fired back up and being spun off into its own separate studio, which it does pose a very interesting question in the here and now, which is, when Bungie was acquired, they said right off the top, we are independent, we are going to ship multi-platform games, and we have our own autonomy. But what does that look like when SIE is the one running the ship, right? Steering that entire studio, and they're under the PlayStation Studios umbrella. And what does that mean for Gummy Bears at this brand new studio that's going to have its own identity? And this game is seemingly, still so early in the concept phase and development cycle where it's got no named platforms, and that conceivably is probably something where it's going to be PS5 and PC, but is it going to be anything else? That's probably the conclusion I would draw in the case of Bungie, where whether they are now or they're going to down the road, which is surely going to happen, is SIE completely taking over. But when that happens, I mean, you would assume Destiny obviously going to be okay. Marathon probably also going to stay multi-plat as well, because the game was already confirmed for multiple platforms, and that's something where Sony still historically has not done what people seem to suggest, which is they swoop in and steal third-party games or something, or known third-party IP and things like that. I mean, obviously it's things where they try and skirt about it in a way where platforms are not named for certain games just yet. So in the case of Final Fantasy VII Remake or Street Fighter 4, right, that's the sort of fringe cases where even then it was immediately announced for PlayStation only. But Stellar Blade is one of our few examples where it's it was announced multi-plat, then they stepped in. But, generally they do try and be mindful of that. So in the case of Marathon, it's okay, Marathon probably going to stay multi-plat. But for the mid to long-term future of anything that Bungie does put out, is that going to be multi-platform if they are under the PlayStation Studios umbrella properly, right? So it's just something to consider right now, especially given that it's going to be a very different outlook for Bungie, knowing what we know now, right? That the sort of dominoes are finally falling into place here, or really just falling apart. Maybe not in place is maybe not the best way to put it, but they are certainly falling. Now, something else that came out of the aftermath of the Bungie situation is a little bit of light being shed on The Last of Us Online and how Bungie, stepped in, did a portfolio review of all of Sony's live service games, and then we saw The Last of Us canceled. And so there's been a lot of, discussion surrounding that project. So there was this one Twitter exchange where one user was responding to Jason Schreier's tweet where he was clarifying the Destiny 3 payback rumor, and they said, "Can you drop a story about how a studio that hasn't made a good game since 2010 can tell Naughty Dog, a studio that makes critically acclaimed games, to cancel a project?" Then Jason says that's not what happened. Someone then chimes in saying, "Didn't you write a story about The Last of Us Online's reassessment based on Bungie's review once they were integrated within Sony?" Jason responds with, and I quote here, Bungie gave Naughty Dog feedback that Naughty Dog found extremely helpful when making what was likely a very smart decision to not go all in on a live service game. This, I thought, was worth pointing out because it's not even new information, technically. When you look at what the original report said, it was a matter of like, oh, Bungie stepped in and their assessment, their sort of concerns that they proposed to Naughty Dog was about the long-term viability of the project. You know, it did not outright say that Bungie had the final call on canceling The Last of Us Online, or, you know, what they said was the very, like, be-all, end-all decision for SIE to cancel the project, or that this was not maybe a little bit more of a mutual, you know, discussion and dialogue that amounted to the outcome of like, okay, we understand. I think we'll take that feedback and decide to shut down the project. I mean, it's one of those things where it could be a splitting hairs argument because some would say, oh, well, that still means Bungie was responsible for the cancellation of that game. If that's how you view it, then I would say, all right, that's fine. But I think it's a little bit more nuanced than just that, right? Especially given that, you know, Bungie went from a head count of, again, like 850 to 1,300 to maintain Destiny, do Marathon, a few other incubation projects. It takes a massive amount of people to maintain, run, and operate a successful live service game, and that's probably one of their key arguments that they were proposing to Naughty Dog, and that's why the blog post at the time for Naughty Dog read the way that it did, which was, okay, it looks like this is going to eat up a lot of studio resources to where we are probably not going to be able to maintain single-player projects alongside live service ones as well. And the tragedy is, from what I've heard about The Last of Us multiplayer, it was a really solid, compelling gameplay loop, and it was like they figured it out. And they had something there that worked. The real tragedy is that for many people, it's still a frustration of like, why did we not get a standard arena style, you know, $30, $40 multiplayer game if it did sort of balloon outside of like the scope of like a tacked on multiplayer for The Last of Us Part 2. Which, you know, I would always agree, but it's something where it's a very different environment nowadays, and even something like that is still, you know, $100+ million, $200 million bet, which to spend $200 million and it's, you know, a very basic multiplayer game, which nobody's really willing to take that kind of risk nowadays. If you're going to spend $200 million making a AAA video game, you might as well ensure that it's going to be this content roadmap that can sustain itself and has a lot of potential financial upside. Although I would love to see somebody sort of take that, in a way, leap of faith and go back to the drawing board of more standardized, you know, multiplayer games that have a year of content and then it's just kind of said and done, and then the servers just stay up for, you know, 10, 15 years, and they eventually get shut down. But that's not the environment we have nowadays. And I don't think we're going to go back to that anytime soon. But again, I'd like to see somebody step in and maybe give it a shot again. Moving on to our next news story, Firesprite is still hiring for their dark story-driven narrative game that they're working on. They put up some new job postings where the language in those job postings made some headlines. So the recent job positions that they're now looking for is senior character artist, cinematic designer, senior cinematic designer, head of audio, principal level designer, and these are all for their still ongoing dark story-driven narrative adventure with, quote, genre-defining goals. The role overview reads, and I quote here, "This huge, highly ambitious project takes atmosphere, storytelling, player agency, and narrative firmly into groundbreaking territory on next-generation hardware technologies." So, yeah, there's not really new info in here because we know they're still working on this game. If anything, we just know that they're really, you know, for sure doing this game in particular, since Sony did have a portfolio review and some games were canceled. The main one for Firesprite in this case being the Twisted Metal project, so that game was at Firesprite, but now that one's axed, so it seems like they're full steam ahead on this one particular game, which the running theory is that maybe this is an Until Dawn 2 while Ballistic Moon does the Until Dawn remake. Whatever it ends up being, there is some curiosity surrounding the language of next generation technology because some are, you know, maybe considering is that for PlayStation 6, which even if it was, because we can actually humor that nowadays, which is, it's 2024 right now. PlayStation 6 is expected in 2028. Games take a very long time to make. Who knows how far along this project is? I know this one was in the oven for a little bit now, so I think you can safely say it's PlayStation 5, maybe really capitalizing on PlayStation 5 Pro, or it's just a standard affair job listing where they're trying to really, spruce it up, make it sound compelling to a prospective applicant. But even in the case of a game coming out in, let's say, 2027 or 28, there's probably going to be a number of native PS6 games that are going to be announced, confirmed, or eventually shipped down the road. So I think that's a pretty safe guess. Now, with all that said, it is time for Let's Talk Plus, the weekly Let's Talk PlayStation giveaway, where one of you can win a $10 PSN code. I would like to congratulate this viewer right here. I'll be contacting you very soon via email or X, and if you'd like to win a $10 PSN code, it is so simple. Follow the link down below, enter the Gleam giveaway, and supporting this channel, a number of ways can gain you an entry, and I'll announce the winner next week, because I'm trying to help pay for your games. Those are the stories from this past week that I wanted to talk about with you all. And our Tuesday video was being out in the field with the PlayStation Portal, testing out its new alleged public Wi-Fi capability. So a very different kind of upload we don't normally do, but that was certainly fun to go out and try getting that to work. So if you haven't seen that, go check that out. But this coming Tuesday, probably another discussion topic. Actually, we might do two this week. It depends on timing. But otherwise, that is pretty much it. So that concludes this week's episode of Let's Talk PlayStation. I'm Ryan Benecki. Thank you all so much for talking with me, and I will see you all next Friday.